Welcome to Dare to Listen. My name is Name, and I'm a self-awareness coach and grief doula. I'm so excited you're here, you're joining in to these conversations. These are conversations I've been having and wanting to have for longer than I can name. In this space together is an invitation to listen to yourself and to what your spirit feels called to engage with. Conversations will range from self-discovery, death, dying, and grief, and how the unseen worlds present themselves and invite us to know more. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Hello, everybody. Hello. Today's episode features a conversation with Avery Kalapa. They are a community weaver, a wellness organizer, and a 20-year practicing and certified yoga instructor. This conversation spans white supremacy, transphobia, and our relationship with social justice, and how we can use various tools for self-discernment. Before we get started, here are a couple of snippets from the show. In this first snippet, Avery talks about how we can sustain ourselves in social justice work. Here's Avery.
And I think that's a good thing when we feel that fire that drives us to action. However, it's not sustainable to be driven from rage. I think a lot of folks, especially in the beginning, who get involved with various forms of activism, the burnout rate is really high because if we're relying on that rage and heartbreak as fuel, eventually, and often quite quickly, like folks get engaged, they're fired up, and then they get exhausted, and then it drops off because they think, oh, I just need to take care of myself. And I really want to unpack that binary. I think if we're really leaning in and taking care and building our lives around what is nourishing us so that we can continue the steady work, the practice, right? Like the sadhana of anti-oppression work.
In this next and last snippet, which is more on the theme of sustainability, Avery invites perspectives on how and why we might engage in dismantling systems of oppression. Here's Avery.
There's this harsh self-criticism piece, the white fragility piece that Robin DiAngelo talks about.
Right.
And so if we can actually offer our ancestors and ourselves some compassion when we understand what's at play, our capacity to stay engaged really increases. If we can understand, oh, this is my sympathetic nervous system freaking out and driving me away from the work because it is telling me I'm in danger. But if we can understand, oh, actually, I am not in danger. I can breathe, I'm safe, and I can continue to engage. That's huge. And by understanding really what an amazing position we're in, like our ancestors, or you could also think of it as ourselves in past lives maybe, went through terrible things and had to do potentially really terrible things in order to survive. And they may not have had the opportunity that we have now to try to make things right. Like these systems are not, as my friend Jen Tucker says, these systems are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. Especially in the places where these systems benefit you. Like that then is your responsibility to like unpack that and interrogate that. And if you can do it with a sense of embodiment and a sense of self-compassion, that work, I won't say it becomes easier because it's not necessarily easy, but it becomes more doable and I think more invigorating.
And listen, Dorothy, my beloved neighbor's donkey, makes a sound appearance in the background. All right, let's start the show. Everybody, on today's show is a dear human, a being who I came to connect with when I was exploring wanting my own further education and pursuits of what does it mean to be anti-racist. And I came across multi-series course with Avery and another being. And Avery is who is on the show today. When I first saw Avery's picture, there was a fierce, grounded energy that called me to say yes. Something about the essence of what I felt through the description and this being shining back through the photo had me click yes. And then we moved into the course and whew. And the whew is the grounded and heart and I'm going to use the word fierce again. Offerings I felt through how Avery guided me through that experience. And Avery is on the line here today. And welcome, Avery.
Yay, good morning. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Me too. Let's start first. What pronouns are right for you?
The right pronouns for me are they, them. Those are the pronouns that feel so good in my body.
Beautiful.
Compared to other pronouns that don't feel so good.
Right. And can you give us an introduction beyond what I've said of who you are in the world?
Sure. First, thank you for anyone listening to this. I'm really excited to be in conversation here now and across time and space. My name is Avery Kalapa. I am a yoga teacher. I'm a community weaver, an organizer. I've been involved with yoga for about 20 years. I'm a certified Iyengar yoga teacher. And my approach to yoga is rooted in anti-oppression. I'm very interested in yoga practices for inner healing that uplift collective liberation and that help us be more and more in right relationship with ourselves and each other and the earth. I really love creating healing spaces that center queer and trans folks and outsiders who are too often left out of mainstream yoga. I cherish anti-assimilation and spaces where we can be our full selves and not have to fit into boxes or contort ourselves into strange energetic, psychological, or physical shapes that don't serve us. Yeah. What else? I garden. I'm a parent. I'm white. I'm queer. I'm a non-binary person. I'm a settler. I am a neurodiverse person. I'm magical, and I'm deeply grateful to be alive. And to get to live here on unceded Tiwa land in Albuquerque.
Yeah. I'm so grateful you named all of those elements of yourself. I'm wondering if you would be willing to guide us in a land acknowledgement in that embodied way that maybe we can experience together collectively.
Sure. I am happy to. I offer this next few minutes really as a chance for us and anyone listening to shift modes and lean into the connection with the land wherever you are so that we can more fully show up for this conversation and ultimately the deeper work, the work of social change and leaning towards less harm and more harmony. So that's the invitation. So wherever you are, maybe you're driving or,
right.
or doing some work, right? So you can't necessarily completely drop in, but you can keep doing what you're doing and drop in. Maybe you can pause and close your eyes. come into a comfortable position. Maybe you want to lay down or sit a little taller if you're seated. But make a conscious choice about positioning the body for ease and for stability. And now tune into your breath, just noticing. Don't try to change the breath or improve the breath. Just observe as you breathe in, you're breathing in. As you exhale, you become aware of what it feels like breathing out. Spread your awareness down through the layers of your body. This warm, earthy, breathing, intelligent body. Relax your belly, ungrip, and feel the weight of your body now connecting to the earth. Let your awareness spread down so there's a connection. Breathe into that connection. Let it give strength and courage to listen, to open, to awaken to something you may not have considered before. Recognize now that your story is woven into the story of this land. We acknowledge now with humility, with gratitude, the other beings of this place, the plants and animals of this place, wherever you are, the ancestors, the spirits of this place. And now stay with your breath in your body as you acknowledge also the harm, the history, the complexity of what has happened here. The resilience, the healing that has happened here and is and will continue to happen. We acknowledge the past, present, and future indigenous people of this place. Take a moment to acknowledge your own ancestral lineage. Without overthinking, just feel that line, that story that has brought you to this place. And now a little deeper breath, breathing into this interconnectivity. Let it foster within you a sense of courage, a sense of willingness to continue the work, to heal, to awaken, to lean into change, to lean in towards justice. Take one full silent breath now. Be with what is there inside of you. May all beings be happy. May we all know real peace. So with this clarity of intention, we'll move into our conversation. You can slowly open your eyes. But especially if anything that may come up in the discussion feels challenging for you, I invite you just to come back. You can always come back in to your breath, and back in, just to notice the somatic field in your body. In fact, whenever we notice our breath, whenever we notice sensation, it sends a message to our nervous system that we are safe enough to calm down and stay present. There's so much that shifts us into that sympathetic fight, flight kind of survival mode. And so just regularly shifting back can really help us stay grounded and awake and open to do something different than what we've just repetitively done in the past. So you can always come back to your body and your breath throughout this conversation and maybe throughout the rest of your day.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Thank you so much, Avery.
I'm imagining folks are going to be listening from wherever. I am on unceded Tewa land, Pueblo land, central New Mexico. And it's nice to just say that name in your mind and be with, if you don't know where you are, if you don't know whose land you're on, there's, you can look it up. Mm-hmm. The internet is amazing. And if you know that, then normalize, saying that name, feeling that presence. I think it's a useful tool.
Yeah. Yeah, a previous episode was a full focus on land acknowledgements, and in that episode offering the phone number where you can text and get the information back. And what I'm hearing in these invitations are coming into myself, coming into awareness and consciousness of what has been the experiences here before I arrived, as well as the bringing in the DNA lineage, as well as bringing in the soul lineage, the land's lineage, opening up to more information than maybe has been or is a part of maybe how I've considered things previous. That invitation to open up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. For me, I'm situated in what's currently known as Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is the ancestral and present-day homeland to the Tewa, Tiwa, Tawa, and Kara-speaking peoples.
There's a great organization. This is actually a project of the Albuquerque Surge group. It's called Honor Native Land Tax.
Yes.
You can find it at honornativelandtax.org. And it's just a beautiful way to take the intention of a land acknowledgement into a more material and financial zone. I just want to name that sometimes we do these things, especially those of us who are white or have various forms of privilege, like our social location. Sometimes we can so easily get into a place of guilt or shame and then oh, I'm going to do this thing because I feel bad. I just want to reframe that when we offer a land acknowledgement, when we take that time to connect, if you make a donation through Honor Native Land Tax, which is all about redistribution of resources back to Native peoples, it really is an uplifting form of nourishment for you. It's good for everybody. It's not oh, this is going to be crappy for you, but because you're a good person, you're doing this thing for someone else. No, this is actually sort of a beautiful, almost like a magical ceremony or a little bit of medicine each time you donate or each time you make the acknowledgement. I think these things can become practices that actually help us, those of us who have privilege and are maybe in the position of wondering how we can do less harm. This is part of our healing journey too.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to name that. And invite you all to check it out. They have this calculator. You can enter in some info and it'll give you a number of this would be a good amount. Yeah, I'm so grateful that that this was created.
What I hear you naming and offering the Honor native land tax, as well as in the guided land acknowledgement, is what's happening in my systems, what's happening internally, and how might I want to shift what's happening or give more presence to what's happening so that I'm engaging with myself and the world from a place that's truer for my systems. Like, as you were naming that, I was noticing, I'm nervous talking to Avery today, and look, there's my flop sweat. Okay, that's happening.
Oh, yeah.
It's how cold outside and I smell. Interesting. That's a part of what I know about my system, and those almost touchstones or those experiences can bring me into more information, and then I can move differently potentially forward. Or maybe I take this experience to a therapist, maybe I take it into my meditation, into my journals, etc. It's I believe when we skip past it, where the harm happens, or where the continuation of the cycle moves on. And that's for me, a beautiful invitation of maybe what I've also heard in the anti-racism framework of, am I being called in or called out? To me, that's calling myself in to knowing myself deeper. Because if I'm in that space of calling out, I'm resistant, I'm fighting, I'm not that opening space of, I want to understand more.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that. And also, I feel nervous too, because it's exciting, but also a little like, woo, it'll be on the public record, this conversation.
Right.
And all the offerings are imperfect and perfect, right? Like we're here together, and I'm trusting that what needs to come through will.
Right.
And yes, I think the more we can disrupt our habits and the ways that we're attached to identifying with things that are contributing to systems of harm, I think that's an important piece. And it feels frustrating to me sometimes because I get impatient. This will probably air a few weeks or several weeks after we have the conversation, but this morning the news is full of another police killing this week of Adam Toledo, a 13-year-old boy in Chicago. And when these terrible things happen, which are relentless, like they just keep happening, I feel such an urgency. And I know the urgency is one of the, like Tema Okun's characteristics of white supremacy culture. And yet it feels like we can't wait. We can't.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing when we feel that fire that drives us to action. However, it's not sustainable to be driven from rage. I think a lot of folks, especially in the beginning, who get involved with various forms of activism, the burnout rate is really high because if we're relying on that rage and heartbreak as fuel, eventually, and often quite quickly, like folks get engaged, they're fired up, and then they get exhausted, and then it drops off because they think, oh, I just need to take care of myself. And I really want to unpack that binary. I think if we're really leaning in and taking care and building our lives around what is nourishing us so that we can continue the steady work, the practice, right? Like the sadhana of anti-oppression work. That's really so key. And where I started with this thought was that it's frustrating, right? Like it's hard for me to think of these small, subtle actions that on some level are part of this really long game. Like racism is probably not going to end in my lifetime. Like these systems and structures, as infuriating and heartbreaking as they are really deeply entrenched in every level of our society, entrenched in the way capitalism works, entrenched in how we relate to each other and ourselves, like the system of supremacy, white supremacy, and all the other toxic hierarchies that are built into that place certain people above others. Like that whole system it's a big scary thing, right? I feel like it's almost like this big dragon that over many generations we have to slay. Although I will name that we are bigger than it. So I love this quote by Ursula Le Guin, because it reminds me that, oh yeah, like on some level, our souls and our radiance and our infinite beingness is so much bigger than these systems that we're having to navigate and survive. This Ursula Le Guin quote: "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words." I just love this because, right, these big things that we think are just going to be around forever, actually, we can create something different.
Yeah.
And I love that also, she speaks about words, because part of what we're here to discuss today is the power of listening and the power of speaking, of opening to speak our truth from a deeply authentic place.
Yeah. For me, that quote ties in an essence of yourself that you named, and that's the magic. That's the maybe mystic elements that we all know in ourselves, maybe in our own unique ways. And there's that common mysticism that we each, I believe, bring forward through who we are. And to me, that's what art is, or that's an element of what art is. It's bringing what's true through me, through this offering. And I get a little stuck sometimes when I'm working with a client who's like, but I'm not artistic. I'm like, can we look at that? Like how you managed to make this spreadsheet make sense to everybody. That's an art. So opening up to our inner magician, opening up to that mystic element that is us, to me is how I become more sustainable in what I'm here on this planet, here in this lived experience to do. And I think also about, in listening to Ursula's words, I think about the past lives that I have connective, energetic knowings of. There have been horrific experiences that I know I lived through, and even though the external was trying to kill me or cause harm to me, there was a piece in me, there were essences in me that I held onto. That to me is where the invitation of the mystic or that magical, described it as slaying a dragon. It's what's that place in me that knows I have more truth than what's being offered as my truth back to me. When I can connect in with that, and that's what I feel is part of the gift that I know when I experience you, Avery, is how you invite me in through who you are and through how you offer what moves through you for me to reconnect with that for myself.
Oh, beautiful. I'm happy that happens. That's the hope, right? Like if we are really seated in our truth and radiance and just showing up, being fully us, then it gives permission for the people around us to do that too. So it's nice to get the reflection back about that. Yeah, I think it's true. We all do have something so needed for the world right now. And it takes a lot of faith and grit, I think, to prioritize that over playing the game of like climbing the ladder or, being successful in the ways that we were raised to think of success. And it's not that those things aren't important. Again, there's not a binary. Like I think we can figure out how to be stable and do that stuff. And it's important to discern, where are we replacing the deeper purpose and meaning in our lives with that sort of foundational or external sort of societal definitions of success. And I think the beautiful thing is when we're in that zone of genius, it really feeds us and nourishes us in a way that other things don't. And so trusting that, like, we don't have to do it all. Like, sometimes when I look at these tragic police killings, I just feel like, darn, why am I not a policymaker, a lawyer, or,
Yeah.
And I just have to trust that the things that I have known clearly are what I need to prioritize in this life are actually also an important part of the puzzle. Like, it's going to take a lot of different people with a lot of different skills, and we don't all need to show up for this work in the same way. In fact, it's necessary that we don't. The important thing is just to figure out what is your way of showing up and get really deep into that, right? And for me, the embodiment piece has been so huge because I needed to do a lot of meditation and yoga asana in order, for one thing, to navigate weird kind of rhythm of frontal cortex chemicals in my brain, my neurodiverse brain. Also, that has been an essential source of resilience and healing and thriving to help me navigate a society that has really messed up binary gender norms, that really tells me over and over every time I go out into the world that I don't belong, or that I'm an outsider, or that I'm invisible, or that my gender expression is somehow wrong. That speaks to my experience, which is so different from, other folks, other trans folks, people with different social location, right? Again and again, it's just become very clear that the nervous system regulation and embodiment work and functional alignment and stability, that stuff feels so important and so worthy of learning about and then being able to share with others. So I just have to trust, well, that is an important piece of this puzzle too, deconstructing these systems of oppression and building something new. But that's beautiful, right? Like, there's room for all of us in the work for liberation. I really believe that's true.
Absolutely. What I'm hearing in your offering here is your own process of the structures or the ideology or the quote rules say become a lawyer, change the system that way. And your own reconciliation or your navigation towards how I'm present in the world is another form of lawyering, or is another form of me finding my way, and I'm trusting the value of that. Because it can be the but of the sentence as opposed to the yes and.
Right.
Yeah. Which again is what you're saying about moving away from the binary, us versus them, all of those comparison traps that happen, versus when I come into myself, when I have that curious inward knowing while also being present to what's happening around me, what's true for me? What's true for me? If that's the anchoring question with loving kindness, as I move forward and speaking it to who I trust, what are the circumstances that invite me to bring my brave self forward? And trusting, if a moment doesn't feel I can offer my braveness, that's an honoring, and that's a guidance I trust myself to follow as well.
Right. It's an experiment. Like, when can I be audaciously authentic? And then there are times, right? For me, I find there's a lot of times where, from internal and or external conditions, that may not be possible. All of this loops me back to really the gift and importance of having a spiritual practice, an embodiment practice, a yoga practice, a movement practice. It's important for us, I think, to develop discernment, viveka, because we all have social conditioning, or you could think of it like samskaras. We all have these imprints from the past.
Yes.
These very deep-seated patterns in our bodies, our minds, our nervous systems that are very much at play in our interactions.
Yes.
Especially this gets tricky when we're with people who have a different social location from us. Our nervous systems can get fired up. Our nervous systems affect each other. If you follow Resmaa Menakem's book,
Yes,
My Grandmother's Hands, if you've read that, he really talks in depth about this piece. And so one thing that we can do, and this is cool if you have a spiritual practice and you're wondering how to relate it more to the external work of building a better world. One thing that spiritual practice and embodiment practice can offer us is an ability to discern when we are acting out of fear, when our nervous system is fired up, when we are dissociative, when we're really acting from a place of survival. Or you could also think of this as acting from a place of our samskaras, collective and or individual, versus am I connected, grounded, able to relate from an autonomous place, from an awake place, from a place that is prioritizing right relationship and listening, right? And listening and being connected to our inner truth and making space for others to really see them and acknowledge them. It's tricky to be able to tell. We might think we're really being open and welcoming and inclusive, and then before you know it, suddenly we're being super awkward. It happens so quickly, but we can practice and we can start to discern, oh, when am I acting from a place of fear and my social conditioning? And when am I acting from a place of connection and embodied listening?
Yes. I love that you brought in my grandmother's hands. I'm at the very beginning of this book, and the place where his words invited me to consider that not only is there fight, flight, or freeze, there might also be annihilate.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, right.
And as I read those words, like everything in me tingled, and I was like, oh my gosh, I now feel the permission that I don't have to feel like an asshole, that I want to kill somebody because they disagree with me. Like, if I can date a reality check, like I've used this example in other places, when I told my beloved grandmother, like in these episodes of Dare to Listen, people have heard me glow about my beloved grandmother. And when I told her that my ex-wife and I got married and she said, you can't get married, I wanted to kill her. Like in a moment, I wanted to launch and punch her. And I was like, whoa. And that was a big place for me to take a seat back, take a breath and go, oh, there's more happening here than my grandmother's words. Can I unpack? Can I look at what is happening? Is it this life? Is it I now know it's a past life where I was a priestess and was tortured. And anyway, that's covered in other shows. But like the more I can sit with and not shame myself that what do you want to do to your grandmother? You know, can I bring that conversation to my fuller awareness and see what's here for me to understand? Which I also feel like ties in with what you were naming earlier about social justice exhaustion. My words, you may be, I think you used the word burnout, but can I come into what I'm engaging with from a grounded place of nourishment? Do I have the bandwidth? Do I have the capacity to read this story of whatever is the information and notice as I'm reading it, the panic, the whatever is coming up in reaction or in response. And again, taking a breath, sitting back with myself and saying, what was touched? And what can I do to nourish myself around what was touched? Not maybe silence myself, not maybe isolate and hide and run away from. What's needed so that I can return back and engage?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that piece of understanding what's happening in our nervous systems and understanding what has happened in history and how those are related is really key for many reasons, but including that it offers us a window for self-compassion. I think one reason we get burned out, and I'm speaking as a white person to other white people or just to other people with various forms of privilege. Like if you're a cis person and you've gotten burned out on thinking about transphobia, for instance, like it could work in various ways. Like the folks that are receiving end of oppression deal with this so much. If you're not used to looking at this, especially, it can be exhausting. So for white people that are sort of starting into their anti-racism journey, it can be exhausting in part because we are really hard on ourselves. There's this harsh self-criticism piece, the white fragility piece that Robin DiAngelo talks about.
Right.
And so if we can actually offer our ancestors and ourselves some compassion when we understand what's at play, our capacity to stay engaged really increases. If we can understand, oh, this is my sympathetic nervous system freaking out and driving me away from the work because it is telling me I'm in danger. But if we can understand, oh, actually, I am not in danger. I can breathe, I'm safe, and I can continue to engage. That's huge. And by understanding really what an amazing position we're in, like our ancestors, or you could also think of it as ourselves in past lives maybe, went through terrible things and had to do potentially really terrible things in order to survive. And they may not have had the opportunity that we have now to try to make things right. Like these systems are not, as my friend Jen Tucker says, these systems are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. Especially in the places where these systems benefit you. Like that then is your responsibility to like unpack that and interrogate that. And if you can do it with a sense of embodiment and a sense of self-compassion, that work, I won't say it becomes easier because it's not necessarily easy, but it becomes more doable and I think more invigorating. You get to experience, oh, actually, this is good for me too. And I'll just mention that quote, another one that maybe, of course, you probably know, from Lila Watson. If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Like this is really for the benefit of all of us.
Yeah.
Right? Because we don't always realize unless someone teaches us or we really dig in, we don't realize that the places we hold privilege are actually constricting and holding us back and harming us and keeping us disconnected as well. And that's an important piece that I think is very inspiring in terms of then stepping away from those samskaras or that social conditioning. Like if I understand that as much as the system of white supremacy benefits me, there are very trackable, clear ways that it's also harming me. And that there's really no scarcity in the goodness and the healing and the possibility. It's not like, oh, this is just going to be crappy for me, but I need to do it so someone else can benefit. Like, no, this really, there's a mutual benefit. It's a lie of racial capitalism that has a scarcity around who will benefit from this work. That comes up a lot too with trans exclusive feminism, and this idea that, oh, if we have trans inclusive spaces, that somehow that is going to be bad and goes against rights and protections for cis girls and women. And it's absolutely not true, right? Like there's no scarcity. Like there's room for everybody in the movement for gender liberation.
Right.
There can still be spaces just for cis women to process patriarchy. Like those spaces are allowed to exist. Just say this is a space for cis women. And then if it's a women's space, then make it for all women, because not all women have vaginas. It's like really there's room and space for all of us in this.
Right.
And the fracturing is very much a tool of those who are working very hard to maintain the systems of oppression. And so the more we can recognize that through working together, and that there is space for sort of all of us in this movement, yeah, I'm excited about that. And of course, it's going to be messy, and there's going to be harm done and processes of accountability, and that's labor, and it takes time and energy. And that relational work is also the work.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. And what I feel you're naming here is, how can I stay open and see what's available to shift beyond maybe my fear? Can I take the layers deeper, or can I expand into what more dynamics are at play? Almost like spanning my focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Which sort of requires that we're at least a little bit relaxed. Because if we're in survival mode, we won't be able to spread out our awareness and notice the subtle underlayers and the root structures.
Right.
Maybe a good time for a deep breath.
Right. Right. Well, and I'm also wondering too, Avery, if we can talk about how people can connect with your work. Do you have more workshops that you're teaching on these topics of racism, transphobia, being a white person in the world, and how to navigate?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this in. And I want to extend a very warm invitation for anyone who's made it through our conversation to come be a part of my world. You can find me on Instagram at Yoga with Avery. And also I have a newsletter. You can keep in touch. My website is yogawithavery.com. And I have a lot of different cool projects coming up that I would love for you all to be in the loop about. There's several special workshops I'm doing. I'm doing a yoga for the pelvic floor workshop coming up. So if you're interested in pelvic floor health and wellness from a non-binary perspective, I have one workshop that's for everyone. And I'm very excited for the first time to offer a pelvic floor yoga workshop just for trans and non-binary folks. So that is coming up mid-May. I'm also teaching a workshop through Citizen Yoga in Detroit called Embody Non-Duality, Embrace Inclusivity. I have a bunch of other workshops too. I'm just going to send you over to my website to check those out. I also have weekly classes online, and you can join my subscription and get access to all of them, plus some other perks. And in those classes, I love to center queer and trans folks and allies, and also activists and folks who are actively working on anti-oppression work in their own ways, who need some embodied sustenance and nourishment for that work. those are the folks I really love to have in my classes, because we do deep, rejuvenating asana. Sometimes it's really focused on relaxation and restorative yoga. Other times it's really vigorous and strong and stabilizing, but always it's centered around this piece of how do we come into right relationship, and how can we use our spiritual practice to keep us grounded and awake and rooted to our spiritual joy, so that we are deeply nourished in this work of changing the world. So very warm invite. If you want to come check out a class with me, you can try your first one free. Just use the coupon code Together We Rise at checkout, and you can come to class with me for free.
And what was the website again? I'm sorry if I missed it.
Sure. The website is yogawithavery.com.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you pointed out your newsletter, because I recently dove in with your newsletter, and your recent post really opened me to feelings of sadness. I was really grateful for your perspective and your vulnerability of sharing about a recent harm that was caused on a podcast. I'm curious if you want to speak to what happened there and what your process was to write that post.
Sure. I can talk a little bit on this. I also found this whole process quite exhausting. It's been interesting how, and I'm not going to name the podcast here, but there was recently a yoga podcast with quite a big following, and two supposed yoga teachers had a conversation that was deeply harmful, transphobic, and spread a lot of false information. And it's one thing to hold harmful beliefs, even when you've been told very clearly over and over that this is creating harm. These are the same belief structures that uphold the more than 80 bills trying to be passed right now around the country that restrict trans people from rights, from healthcare. And so to have those toxic beliefs expressed in a yoga context, like to a yoga community, and to know that someone was using their platform to amplify that harmful language. Yeah, very sad and very troubling. Really the lack of viveka, of discernment, and everything we've been talking about. Interestingly, it catalyzed a lot of community connection, and for that I'm grateful. And so if you want to learn more about this, you could read, I wrote a blog post, it's on my website. I unpack in there some about why that podcast was problematic. And also, I'm interested in why people get so attached to identities or to belief systems when they have clearly been told this is causing harm.
Right.
And I don't just mean emotional harm, but we're talking about life and death here, really. There's an IG Live I did recently with a bunch of amazing folks with trans and non-binary yoga teachers that Susanna Barkataki hosted. You can track it down if you want to listen to that juicy conversation. And on it, Jacoby Ballard said, it really comes down to the need to be right versus the right to live.
Oh, wow.
And so much of this comes down to that. And why are people so invested in the need to be right about something on some level that for them is theoretical? Their life and their gender is upheld by society, protected, and just fine. But meanwhile, here are trans youth and trans people who statistics show having access to gender transition is life-saving. Like the suicide rates, the self-harm rates go immediately way down from a pretty high number to that of cis people of the similar age group and demographics when people have access to gender affirming care. Mm-hmm. So that's very clear to me, right? Like this is life-saving. Mm-hmm. This is providing space for people to live, and not just people, but precious, brilliant, intelligent, amazing people. My beloved non-binary and trans siblings are some of the most incredible, wise, generous, powerful people that I've met. And so to go through that process of interrogating why people are attached to these belief systems and identities that dehumanize other people, right, and that cause harm, like what's that about? Mm-hmm. As yoga teachers, as yoga practitioners, as meditators, as spiritual people, can we be curious enough? What is that about? Mm. And how can I change that? Right. That's really what I wrote about, because obviously these systems are hard to divest from. It's not so simple. And if we are given some tools and some framework and a way of at least moving forward, hopefully we take it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. In hearing you speak about the dehumanization with the bills that are aimed to get passed that don't see everyone or don't see people as human, people who are navigating their lived experiences and being excluded in their lived experiences, I'm reminded of when my ex and I would travel, and the wanting a bathroom buddy, the being sirred, and then the uncomfortability. Like my ex would not want to go to the grocery store. And I was like, why don't you want to go to the grocery store? And so it was an invitation for me to see another person's experience of, oh, okay, this is really triggering for your system. I'm so grateful you brought me in and shared this with me. And absolutely, I can be the grocery shopper. You know, if that would be a support, you know, let's talk about it. Let's move in with that. And another really special person in my life back in Illinois didn't want a pronoun, didn't feel comfortable with any of the options. And I got that early experience in my system, or that new experience of, oh, we're always going to use their name. It was like training my mouth, training my protocols of how to talk in the world. And I remember talking about this friend with other people. And then when other people would use a pronoun for this person, I was like, oh, you know, I could feel in my system, not right, not right, not right. And I was like, oh, okay, there's so much reshifting that needs to happen. Noticing that from a place of love, as opposed to maybe that punching that I referenced earlier about my beloved grandmother, right? Of, we're navigating something new. This is shifting our way of approaching something. For me, what helped me come into the conversation was really opening up to feeling how this experience was for these beloved people in my life.
Right. Yeah. When we're in relationship with someone.
Mm-hmm. And can I be in relationship to somebody I don't know? Maybe people listening to this podcast are going to find an invitation of opening up to your voice, Avery. You know, like, can we open up to whoever is not me, regardless of that depth of relationship? Am I opening to another's experience from loving kindness and noticing if it's something different? Oh, why? So again, that curiosity, that discernment, that's what I feel us highlighting in these conversations.
Yeah, because when we have a little more space, that's a precious possibility for something new to grow out of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we listen, when we receive, when we're willing to speak our heart's truth, and when we're willing to divest from our own habit patterns to make space for someone else.
Yeah.
That's so huge.
Yeah. Right.
And really, it's so good for all of us.
Yeah. And I love that the phrase or the words that you put together there, space for more. I'm thinking of, when I've been in conversation with other fellow white people about how do things change? How do the systemic realities morph into something different? And that place of who's at the table, who's in these conversations, and making sure that who's at the table is more than my perspective.
Yeah, that's part of divesting from white supremacy, is knowing other people have other ways and other perspectives and other ways of being and loving and living. And those have incredible value, right? Because we're taught that the cis, white, heteronormative, upper middle class way of being is the creme de la creme. And we should all be trying to go for that.
Right.
And in fact, there's so many other way more expansive, amazing possibilities beyond that definition of success.
Totally.
And we get to discover and actually build our lives. We get to almost create our own definition of success.
Yeah.
When we do this brave work of exploring what is possible beyond the boxes that have been built for us.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yay.
Yay. Avery, thank you so much for bringing all of your experiences through word and breathing and magic into this conversation today. I'm so, so grateful for how you move in the world and your generous spirit of sharing how you move through the world, through this conversation and all the ways that you share. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's really a treat to get to share in this way. And I hope it is of benefit. It's always a gamble. Creating something or, that's going to get sent out into the world. And so my real hope is, even with all my imperfections and the ways that I'm still ignorant and the ways that I'm still learning and growing, I really hope that whoever listens to this found some benefit and some sustenance and nourishment in the conversation. And thank you, Name, for holding this space. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, Avery, thank you so much.
Yeah, much love.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for engaging in these conversations through your ears, through your heart, through your soul, your being, your essence. I'm grateful you've been present with us. If you've listened this far, chances are you've opened up, you've learned, you've considered more information. And if that's true, I invite you to consider making a donation to Avery. And you can find out how at Avery's website, yogawithavery.com. Until next time.